the main business. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Queen's Speech, motion for an address, adjourn debate on question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Now. Thank you. I call to open the debate the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, Secretary David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by commending the new member on learning the ropes even quicker than the rest of us did? So I hope she has success with her adjournment debate. Now, the negotiations over our exit from the European Union are fundamental to our future. It's no exaggeration to say they'll shape everything we want to achieve as a country over the coming years and decades. We're doing nothing less than refashioning Britain's place in the world. Our success or failure will determine and shape all our futures. So it's obviously a great responsibility, but also a great opportunity, and it falls on all of us in this place, every one of us in this Parliament, to make a success of it. Now, if we work together and we succeed, we can ensure a strong and growing economy which spreads prosperity and opportunity around the country, which underpins well-funded public services and gives a better future for us and our children. Now, I've always been clear that after Brexit, the United Kingdom will continue to be the outward-looking and global nation it's always been. In a moment. Indeed, it should be more engaged with the world than ever before. For I firmly believe that last year's vote to leave the EU was not a call for retrenchment, a call to look in on ourselves. The UK has the means, the ambition, and now the freedom to play a more positive role in the world. I give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way on that precise point. I believe the opportunities of Brexit are a global Britain. And on that issue of leaving the customs union and the single market, does he agree with me that that will allow us to forge trade links with countries like China, the United States, of which we cannot do on our own whilst we are members of the European Union?
He raises a very good point, which one, if he forgives me, I'll come back to a little later. As I was saying, we have the means, the ambition and the freedom to play a more positive part in the world. And that's demonstrated in our commitments on defence and on international aid. The UK is the only country in the world that meets both its NATO pledge to spend 2% of GDP on defence and the UN target to spend 0.7% of our gross national income on development and spending. In 1 second. That ensures that we both defend our values, work to tackle poverty and conflict, and help to protect the most vulnerable in the world. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. The right honourable gentleman talks about our commitments to defence and our commitments to the rest of the world in international aid, and I agree with both of those. What about his government's commitment to Wales? Before the Brexit debate, Andrew R.T. Davis said, I will make it my mission to ensure that Wales continues to receive at least every penny of the aid money it has historically received via the EU. We deserve and are entitled to no less. Will Wales get what it deserves?
Of course, and indeed Wales is represented on the Joint Ministerial Committee, which we've had several meetings of, and this issue came up, and the main funding streams for Wales fall in the Common Agricultural Policy and structural funds, and both of those have been underpinned by the Treasury to the end of the current financial round. For a moment. I'll make some progress and give way again. I've got to be fairly disciplined about giving way because we've got very tight timetable. Now, after exiting the European Union, Britain will still be a country that still steps up to its role as a world leader. That means continuing to help to protect and secure our wider European continent. We want to deepen cooperation with other European states and bring the European Union policy into a wider global framework. As we've said, we'll seek a deep and special partnership with the European Union, one that reflects our shared values and history, one that works for all parts of the United Kingdom, our overseas territories and Crown dependencies, and one that delivers for the special circumstances around the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, because no one wants to see a return to the hard border. It should be a partnership like no other. It should be underpinned by ambitious agreements on free trade and customs, covering goods and services, and seeking the greatest possible tariff and barrier-free trade. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State. There's been much talk about transitional arrangements. If such arrangements are put in place, can the Secretary of State guarantee that there will be legally binding agreements on trade and customs arrangements, as well as taking those arrangements outside of the remit of the European Court of Justice?
Yes, indeed. Indeed, that would be one of the things we'll be endeavouring to achieve, legally binding arrangements on that. And I'll come back to that in some detail in a moment, if I may. I'll give way to the...
I appreciate what the Secretary of State has said already about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. He does accept, however, that if security information indicates that there's a radicalisation of people in the Republic of Ireland, security considerations will always predominate in terms of the border issue.
Well, I say the honourable gentleman that security considerations pretty much always predominate on control of immigration and control of migration generally, and there'll be no difference here. We obviously treat the security of all of our citizens and all of our allies' citizens as paramount. And that's what brings me to the fact it should include a broad security agreement covering all aspects of our current collaboration, including defence, foreign policy, justice, home affairs, law enforcement and counter-terrorism. And it should be supported by continued cooperation and open access in highly regulated areas like aviation, financial services, data, transport, nuclear. Now, we recognise that such a wide-ranging partnership will require fair and uniform implementation. It must also be long-lasting. That's why we must ensure mechanisms exist to manage the evolution of our regulatory frameworks, to maintain a fair and open trading environment and minimise non-tariff barriers. In a second. In fact, on that point, I'll give way.
I thank him for giving way. At the weekend, he said that he was pretty sure that he would get the sort of trading deal that he wants. Does he think that sort of language gives the kind of assurances that our businesses and our economy needs?
Well, I'll say to the honourable gentleman that the question was put to me whether I was 100% sure. And the first thing one ought to learn in this business is to be honest about these things, bluntly. And I don't think saying at the beginning of a negotiation you are 100% sure of exactly what the outcome will be would give confidence to anybody. It certainly wouldn't give confidence to me, even if it was said by him. Now, all right, one more time, and then I've got to make some progress.
Thank my right honourable friend for giving way. The whole point of a negotiation is you need to be prepared and ready not to do a deal, because that way you can then make sure that you can have strength in your negotiation. To that extent, would my right honourable friend agree that it's really important that we are ready to do customs at places like Dover in my constituency, deal or no deal?
Well, what I do agree with what he said is that we have to make sure that we are prepared for every contingency. And a large part, almost the invisible part of my job, is that... no, if you'll forgive me, I must make some progress. The invisible part of my job is actually making sure we are prepared for contingencies, and that happens as we speak now. Now, it's also clear, we've also been clear, this new partnership must be overseen by a new and independent impartial dispute resolution mechanism. This cannot and will not be the European Court of Justice. No nation outside the European Union submits the direct jurisdiction of the ECJ, and neither will the UK. We'll start towards this new partnership by securing the rights of citizens on both sides. And I know everyone in this House will agree with me that European Union citizens make a huge contribution to our society. Now, we've heard today from the Prime Minister about what the approach will entail, but the overarching principle is that European citizens living in the United Kingdom will continue to live their lives in exactly the same way as British citizens, with the same rights, no, not for the moment, with the same rights and responsibilities. We intend to reach agreement on this issue as quickly as possible. But I've given away quite a lot so far. I'm going to be disciplined. No. But not everything in these negotiations will be easy. I'm practicing being masterful. There we are. No. They will be complex. They will be complex. And I have no doubt, at times, even confrontational. But I'm convinced that both sides want to secure close cooperation and a deep new partnership. Now, not for the moment. In a moment. Last year, in the referendum, we received a national instruction, one which we will undertake in a way that serves the national interest. The instruction of the British people was to take back control of our borders, our money and our laws. Both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party campaigned on manifestos which promised to exit the European Union and end the free movement of people. Those two manifestos received over 80% of the popular vote. So failing to deliver on this instruction is not an option for those of us that count ourselves as Democrats. Ending the free movement of people means leaving the single market, as the EU has made abundantly clear to those who cared to listen. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Secretary of State. He said that countries that are outside the EU would not directly be under the remit of the European Court of Justice. But several countries outside the EU indirectly have arrangements with the European Union whereby the European Court of Justice or an equivalent body is established. Is that what he's aiming for?
No, what he's describing is something like the EFTA Court, I guess, where there is a parallelism. No, that's not the aim. The aim is to have an independent arbitration arrangement, as is normal, for example, with the CETA Act, the CETA agreement, which does exactly that. It has nominees from either side, an independent chair. That's the sort of thing we have in mind. No. I'm afraid the honourable gentleman has to learn some discipline at some point in life or other. I thought discipline was his thing. There we are. Now, we all ending the free movement of people means leaving the single market, as the European Union has made abundantly clear to those who have cared to listen. We all accept the need to protect existing UK businesses in the European Union. Leaving the single market does not mean losing access to that market, which is why we are proposing a new ambitious free trade agreement. But it's not just about protecting existing markets, as my honourable friend raised in the first intervention. To deliver the national interest, we must seize on our new freedoms in terms of trade to create jobs and lift living standards. Britain must get out into the world, forge its own path and be a true beacon for free trade. No, that means leaving the customs union, so that Britain, for the first time in over 40 years, will be able to take full advantage of growing markets across the world and determine a trade policy fashioned around, not around 28 countries' interests, but about one country's interests. So we get a trade policy that suits this country and this country alone. This has been reflected. The European Commission itself. The European Commission itself says that 90% of the future growth in world trade will come from outside the European Union. And this has already been reflected by the long-term decline, the share of British goods that go to the European Union, as our global trade has increased dramatically. I give way to the Honourable Lady who knows all about this.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr Speaker, having just come from the European Parliament, would the Secretary of State agree with me that there are many colleagues from across Europe who also want to see a deep trading partnership with Britain going forward, based on keeping strong standards for consumers and other such standards, and therefore a special bespoke relationship for our trade?
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend on what I think is her maiden intervention, delivered brilliantly, as I would expect, and she's exactly right. We want a deep, special, bespoke arrangement, exactly, to maximise our trade opportunities. No, as I said, the 90% growth outside has meant that our relative share of trade in the EU has gone down. And in services, for example, we're now 60% outside the EU and 40% inside. Now, all of this without preferential trade agreements for much of our trade. And just so the House understands, the best academic data I can find shows that creating a new trade agreement increases the amount of trade by about 28%, something like that. Or if the House wants an individual parable, NAFTA, in the first 7 years of its operation, increased trade by 40%. So these are really significant items of policy which we can exercise. The honourable member is looking at me. I'll give way to him.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way to me. On the question of academic research, can he confirm what the most recent academic research says about the cost to the British economy of coming out of the single market and the customs union?
That research would depend on what the actual deal was. I mean, it's madness to make an estimate without knowing what the deal is. If the deal is a comprehensive free trade area with no tariffs and no non-tariff barriers, there'll be zero effect. So it is rather daft to try and cite some non-existent academic issue. No, he hasn't yet built my sympathy. No.
I think the Secretary of State has indicated that he's not going to give way to the honourable gentleman. I think he needs to accept that.
So if this House wants a Brexit deal that drives prosperity and living standards, if it really wants a Brexit for jobs, then it must put its faith in free trade and ensure that an exit means we can embrace its opportunities to the full. Now, let us move beyond the platitudinous propaganda and hard and soft Brexit. Let's discuss how we fashion our new place in the world and start acting together truly in the national interest. I'll give way now.
It's obviously the start of a very special relationship. The Secretary of State will know that the Prime Minister earlier published her document about EU citizens living in the UK. The one thing she failed to mention in the House is that all these EU citizens will not be functioning exactly as now. They will have to have documentation with them. They will have effectively an ID card. I'm surprised. Surely this Secretary of State isn't going to support ID cards for EU nationals in the UK.
You know, I was right not to give way in the first place, because he's got it wrong. No, it's not an ID card. Of course, what we're talking about here is documentation to prove you've got a right to a job, right to residence, all the rest of it. That's not, you don't have to carry that around all the time. That's an ID card. That's rather like your birth certificate, not an ID card. Good heavens. Anyway, I will now move on, turn, Mr. Speaker, to Mr. Deputy Speaker, beg his pardon, to the legislative agenda. There is an extensive. This is going to be the last one, but yes, okay.
For those such as the Liberal Democrats and others who want to remain in the European Union, do you not think they should ask their constituents, do they really want the United Kingdom indefinitely to remain part of an undemocratic system which is governed by majority voting, which takes place behind closed doors, and then moving on towards integration with the common defence policy, the common finance ministry, and also further moves towards a political union in which we be in the second tier of a two-tier Europe dominated largely by one country?
I know by the honourable gentleman's standards that was short, but by the standards of an intervention it was very long. Secretary of State.
Nevertheless, it was a crisp characterisation of an argument he's been making for many years, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's as right today as it was when he first made it. So, now, there's an extensive legislative agenda which is necessary to prepare the UK for its new place in the world. Working together in the national interest will be crucial as we go through this process in this House and the other place of putting necessary legislation in position to make sure our laws work effectively on the day we leave the European Union. For my part, I'm willing to work with anyone to this end. The sheer importance of this issue makes that essential. The eyes of the country will be on us all. We'll all be judged on our willingness to work pragmatically and effectively together to deliver the verdict to the people in last year's referendum. Nothing is more central to this than the repeal bill, the so-called Great Repeal Bill. The principle is straightforward: to repeal the 1972 Act and to transfer existing European Union law into UK law. And, to answer a question which my opposite number has raised, these rights and freedoms be brought into UK law without qualification, without limitation, without any sunset clauses. Any material changes will be dealt with by subsequent primary legislation. I cannot stress enough to the House and to the nation the importance of this bill in ensuring we can have a smooth and orderly exit from the European Union. Every part of the United Kingdom needs to prepare its statute book and ensure that it functions after we leave the European Union. The repeal bill will give the devolved administrations the power to do just that and ensure a smooth and orderly exit for all. As we've also said repeatedly, we expect there will be significant increase in decision-making power of each devolved administration once we exit the EU. That's why he probably wants to wait 2 seconds before he intervenes. That's why given that this bill affects the powers of devolved institutions and legislates in devolved areas, we will seek the consent of the devolved legislatures for the bill. We would like everyone to come together in support of this legislation, which is crucial to delivering the outcome of the referendum. Does he still want to intervene? Or? Yeah. Okay.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. In an earlier incarnation, his right honourable friend, now the Secretary of State for the Environment, assured the people of Scotland that after Brexit, Scotland could expect to have devolved power over our own immigration policy. Is that still an undertaking that he agrees to?
No, I don't remember that, and I haven't seen it. I'll look at it and come back to it. Now, I didn't have an earlier incarnation in this job. Sorry, I'll give way to the other lady. Yeah.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He talks about an extensive legislative agenda, but somehow he still misses out anything to do with the environment. There's no environment bill here. And simply saying we're going to transfer environmental legislation into the repeal bill doesn't work, because it needs to be A, updated, and B, enforceable. If you haven't got the Commission and you haven't got the ECJ, there's no clarity as to how you're going to enforce that legislation. So why is there no bill?
Well, with respect, when it is transferred across, and there will be stages in this, as I've explained to the House before, which we either create by SI or by primary legislation, where we create the relevant administrations and regulatory bodies and so on to actually run the new legislation. Of course, development beyond that will come later, but at the moment we're talking about bringing the whole corpus of EU environmental law into British law. And that is not nothing by any stretch of the imagination. Now, no, I've got some progress to make. When we designed our approach to the repeal bill, we endeavoured to strike the right balance between getting our statute book in order for the day we exit, but also ensuring full parliamentary involvement and scrutiny. Indeed, it's the only viable plan that's been put forward in this House. While I've heard some concerns raised by those on the benches opposite, I've heard no alternatives put forward, nor any detailed proposals for how they would approach this crucial matter. As I've said to my opposite number when I presented our white paper on the repeal bill, if in the next 2 years we find something we've missed, we'll put it right. That offer still stands, not just to the opposition, but to the entire House. We must get this right. We must be able to deliver a functioning UK statute book by the day we exit the European Union. When the Lords Constitution Committee examined this issue, they found few alternatives. Their recommended approach aligns closely with that which we have set out. It's vital for businesses, workers and consumers across the United Kingdom that this House undertakes the difficult but eminently achievable task of working together responsibly in the national interest to provide certainty and stability. Now I won't for the moment. While the repeal bill is the centrepiece of our approach, it's far from the only piece of exit-related legislation we're putting through. The government's bringing forward a first tranche of bills, and I'd say to the honourable lady who just intervened on me, a first tranche of bills, not the last one, on areas affected by our exit from the European Union. These include legislation on trade, customs, immigration, international sanctions, nuclear safeguards, agriculture and fisheries. And I've told this House a number of times, we're not going to make significant policy changes without first passing primary legislation that will be thoroughly debated and voted on in both Houses. These bills deliver on that promise. This initial tranche of bills also has a further purpose. As I'm sure many across the House would agree, it's the job of a responsible government to prepare for all eventualities. I made clear yet again, and as was raised with me a few moments ago by the member for Dover, I made yet again today that we want a close new partnership with the EU that works for everyone. However, we must also ensure we have a functioning statute book and functioning national systems no matter what, in other words, for all outcomes. These bills will help provide that. Not doing so would, as the then Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, who's here, put it, would be a dereliction of duty. I think that was the phrase he used. We must and will be prepared for any outcome. However, I remain confident that we can get the right deal from these negotiations. Doing so is fundamentally in the interest of both the UK and the EU. A strong and prosperous EU, capable of projecting its values and continuing to play a leading role in the world, is in the United Kingdom's best interests, just as a strong and prosperous United Kingdom is in the European Union's best interests. The task ahead will no doubt be challenging, but it's a task set to us by the British people in last year's referendum, a national instruction. So it's our duty in this House to pull together and deliver on that instruction in the national interest. For if we do, we can deliver a better and brighter future for the entire United Kingdom, a future where we step onto the world stage as a champion for free trade, a firm advocate of the rule of law and a true beacon for democracy.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When Britain voted in the referendum 1 year and 4 days ago, the question on the ballot paper was a narrow technical question: to remain in or to leave the EU. But the vote was far from narrow and technical. People saw different questions behind those boxes. It was a vote on the state of the nation. Above all, it was a vote on the state of the nation, just as the general election turned out to be. A nation fed up with inequality, fed up with low wages, fed up with under-resourced public services, fed up with the imbalance between our nations and regions, fed up with austerity, fed up with politics and politicians. If ever there was a need for a government capable of transforming the country economically and politically, it is now. Britain needed a transformative Queen's speech last week, but this government is too weak to deliver it. The Queen's speech is threadbare and lacks ambition. There is no detail. There can't be, because the Prime Minister gambled and lost. A majority has become a minority. All bets are off as to the future. Just when we needed strong government, we've got uncertainty and fragility. And I suspect history will be a harsh critic. And it doesn't end there, Mr Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister made a statement calling the general election, she said, and I quote, "Every vote for the Conservatives will make me stronger when I negotiate for Britain. Every vote for the Conservatives means we can stick to our plan." She wanted a landslide. She ended up in a mess, her own description. The majority, the Prime Minister now has no majority, no mandate and no authority. And it tells the outcome of the first round of the negotiations showed how unrealistic the government's rhetoric has been. The Secretary of State promised us before the election that would be the row of the summer over the Commission's proposed timetable and schedule of negotiations. By lunchtime Monday, he'd folded. The government also has managed to get on the back foot in relation to EU citizens. Had the government acted quickly and unilaterally, as Labour repeatedly said it should, then it could have set the agenda. Instead, the EU has done so. They stated their position in April. Full rights, as they're currently enjoyed, to be guaranteed and underpinned by the Court of Justice of the European Union. The government position is now seen by them as an inadequate response. And although the Prime Minister, but may I just say this, although the Prime Minister struggled to give an adequate answer to the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central, the Secretary of State knows, I know, and our EU partners know, that rights of family reunification currently enjoyed by EU nationals will change, and in future they will be subject to the financial and other qualifications that apply more generally. They will change, and that's perhaps why that question was avoided. I do hope we get agreement on EU citizens and on UK citizens. I do hope we get an agreement, and I do hope we get an early agreement to settle the anxiety. But the government's approach to date has made that harder to achieve than it should have been. I give way.
Just going to, on a point of information, ask the Right Honourable Gentleman. Congratulations, by the way. To ask him whether it's now Labour's policy to support the rule of the European Court of Justice within the United Kingdom.
Let me just deal with that in relation to EU citizens first, and I'll come to it more generally when I get to that part of my response. So far as the EU nationals are concerned, we need to understand the concern that our EU partners have. They recognise that whatever agreement is in place has to last for the lifetime of EU nationals here, for the lifetime. That means, in some cases, 50 years plus. 50 years plus. They know how our system works. They know that no one government can bind the next, and their concern is understandable, that what is given in good faith and assured today could be taken away in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and yet their citizens want to have their lives here for decades. That is why they want some mechanism external to our parliamentary regime in order to underpin those rights. And it's no answer to their concern to simply say we've got the best judges, we've got the Supreme Court, because as the Secretary of State will understand, if the law in this country changes in 5 years and their rights are reduced, our Supreme Court will have to apply the legislation as it then is, rather than the agreement which is reached here. That is their concern in order to have something outside the... And I'll also say this, because the Prime Minister, when pressed on this last week, and I think it's in the leaflet, in the document that was produced today, made clear that this will be an international agreement, and therefore it's subject to international enforcement. And the pretense that this can all be done within our own courts and our own jurisdiction is a pretense. I'll come to the wider question when I will, but it would be far better, we talk about honesty and doing this in a grown-up way, it would be far better if the government recognised what that core concern of is the EU and found a way of ensuring that their concerns are met, because these are the lives of real people going on for decades and decades. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm going to just make some progress if I may. Mr Deputy Speaker, back home the divisions are obvious. The Chancellor's Mansion House speech last week was clearly an attempt to spike the Prime Minister's Brexit approach. Thus he spoke of, and I quote, a jobs and prosperity first Brexit. That reflects the Labour Party manifesto, where we said a jobs and economy first Brexit. Jobs and prosperity, jobs and the economy. The Chancellor also spoke of an early agreement on transitional measures. No cliff edge for the economy. The Labour Party manifesto. To negotiate transitional arrangements to avoid a cliff edge. The Chancellor's clearly been reading our position. The Chancellor spoke of management of migration, not shutting it down. The Labour Party manifesto. Fair rules and reasonable management of migration. The question is the Chancellor's speech a personal view, the government's view, or the view that he hopes the next Prime Minister will take?
He will.
Clearly we cannot go on like this. I will in just a moment. It's damaging our reputation abroad. It is damaging our reputation abroad and weakening our position. And just like the Secretary of State, I was in Brussels last week, and the talk in Brussels is, what is going on? How long is this government going to last? Yeah. We have put ourselves in the worst possible starting position. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the right honourable learned gentleman giving way. While we're on his manifesto, I wonder if he might clear up a really important point. Directly after the general election, having fought on a manifesto which made it clear that they would take back control of their borders in the Labour manifesto, both his leader, his shadow chancellor, and also the member for Camberwell and Peckham made it very clear that the Labour position was to take back control of their borders, leave the single market and leave the customs union. Subsequently, he has gone out and said that leaving the single market and the customs union were not absolute and they were on the table. Could you clear up what the position really is from the Labour Party?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. That's not an accurate reflection of what I said. I will come to that because I'm going to deal with that in my speech in due course. I will come to that in due course.
Yes,
I will come to it when I get to that part of my speech. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State need to acknowledge the effect of the general election on their Brexit strategy. Yep. If the general election was an attempt, as the Prime Minister said, to strengthen her hand on Brexit, the outcome is a powerful case for a rethink. It is time to press the reset button. Yep. First, the tone and approach has to change. The belligerent, hostile attitude to date has alienated our allies, and left Britain isolated. We need a more constructive and responsible approach. We share values with our EU partners. We have a shared history. We will continue to share values, and we want a shared future. Not membership of the EU, that was decided last year, but a full and meaningful partnership with the EU, based on principles of cooperation and collaboration. I think the Foreign Secretary doesn't understand. I'm on about a tone and approach. This is particularly pertinent, I think, for the Foreign Secretary, whose tone and approach. Anyone who's been backwards and forwards to Brussels knows very well how badly some of the Foreign Secretary's comments have gone down with our EU partners. This is about building the environment in which we can get the best deal for our country, which is in the interest of all of us. I will give way.
An approach. I'd request him to change his tone and approach to something a bit more positive. Brexit is an opportunity for our country to grasp, not a crisis to manage. And to look behind what the British people voted for last year is hypocritical and arrogant of him.
One of the biggest risks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to these negotiations is utter complacency.
Yes.
Utter complacency, the failure to realise the risks and complexity of the negotiations we're going through. And it is quite right for the opposition to challenge the government at every twist and turn to ensure that these negotiations go as well as they possibly can. I will make some progress. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in addition to tone and approach, the second thing that needs to change is this. We need to drop the no deal is better than a bad deal mantra. I will make my point and then I'll give way. No deal would be a miserable failure. As the Chancellor said last week, it will be a very, very bad outcome indeed. It is what happens automatically on the 29th of March 2019 if we don't reach agreement. We are gently pushed over a cliff. Threatening to jump doesn't kid anyone. No deal means no agreement at all. No agreement on trade, no agreement on security, no arrangements for passing information, because that's all done according to an EU framework. No arrangements for not all done, but most of it. The Secretary of State knows very well this point, and he should not belittle it. If we don't reach agreement, we have no arrangements in place to replicate the current arrangements for passing security and intelligence and counter-terrorism, counter-crime information across. There's no point of pained expression from the Foreign Secretary. If we have not reached agreement, we have not reached agreement on those matters. If it also means we have not reached agreement on aviation, it also means we have not reached agreement on the Northern Ireland border. It also means we have not reached agreement on EU citizens. That's what no deal is. No deal, no agreement. And the Secretary of State said we must be honest in this debate. He knows, he must know in his heart of hearts, that's an untenable position for the United Kingdom to find itself in 2019. So let today be the day we bury the phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal. I will give way.
Very grateful to the Chinese Secretary for giving way. For him to be balanced in his view on no deal, he also needs to talk about what no deal means to the EU 27. We looked at this at the Foreign Affairs Committee, and actually the experts say that no deal for the EU 27 is as harsh as no deal for the United Kingdom. A bit of balance in his words, I think, will go down very well in terms of a common policy on it.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I readily accept that not only do we need a deal, but the EU needs a deal, and that's why we should not be talking up no deal as a viable strategy, or adopting the position of the Foreign Secretary is perfectly okay with no deal. It is not a viable option. It's not a tenable option. No deal means we've not agreed anything. I will give way.
Thank the Shadow Secretary for giving way. Does he accept that adopting a narrative that is so wholly uncritical of the European Union, he leaves himself and indeed his party open to the charge that they wish to subvert the will of the British people? Is he holding to page 6 of his own manifesto that said we wish to leave the European Union?
I'm grateful for that intervention. I really do not think that shooting the idea that no deal could possibly be viable or tenable, or actually, in honesty, the position we could possibly arrive at in 2019, is adopting the position of the EU. It's actually adopting the position of the UK. The UK needs a deal to safeguard its interest. This is a point made in the national interest. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will give way.
Because, of course, it is realistic to imagine that we will not get a comprehensive trade agreement with the EU at the time we leave, and that interim arrangements will persist under WTO rules, which may well be zero-tariff rules. But you have to believe that the EU is seriously insane if they want to ground all flights between the UK and the EU, if they refuse to do the products and standards arrangements that they have with 100 or more other countries, whether or not they have a free trade deal, that they're going to check every Mini being exported to the EU to see if it's a car and fits the definition of the EU's definition of a car. Does he really think the EU is so insane that they would want to do that?
Speaker, this mischaracterisation of the point I'm making really doesn't help. This is not the EU demanding. If we don't have a lawful basis for these activities in the UK, then we don't have the authority to do it. It is no good talking up a no deal as if it's a viable, tenable option. I'm now going to press on to my third point in terms of the reset, and it's this. We need a razor-like focus on how we retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union. The Secretary of State stood at that dispatch box on the 24th of January and promised this House that he would reach an agreement that provided the, I quote, exact same benefits as single market membership and the customs union. And he knows, because we've raised it repeatedly since then, that we will hold him to that. It's one of the 6 tests I set out for the government to meet when it comes to the final agreement. It will be a good... I will give way.
Very grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State. Would he agree that the best way to get the benefits of the single market is actually to stay in the single market?
Indeed.
The Shadow Secretary of State will be heard, and if it means people being removed from the chamber, that will happen as well. Sir Keir Starmer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, our manifesto was absolutely clear about retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union. So far as membership is concerned, although almost everybody who wants a progressive new relationship with the EU wants to retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union, almost everybody accepts that that cannot be done in an unreformed way because of the rules of the single market as they now are. The question, frankly, as to whether we start from reform of the single market or start from a bare agreement and work up is secondary to the outcome that we want to achieve. The outcome we want to achieve is no tariffs for goods going across between us and the EU and vice versa, no new red tape at customs, including rules of origin, and a deal that works for services as well as for goods. That is the outcome that we want to achieve. We have to recognise the concerns of the EU, and they are 2 concerns in particular. The first is that if we are released from all obligations of a regulatory nature in relation to moving goods and services across Europe, we will be able to undercut them economically, and that is their main concern. The second is that if we strike free trade agreements that are released from any of the standards and regulations that they apply, there is the prospect of flooding the UK with goods and products from other countries that don't meet those standards and or go into Europe. They are the issues that we need to negotiate. So far as I want to deal with this, because I know this is an issue of real concern to our own party. We've said the outcomes are what matter, not the model for achieving those outcomes. Not the model for achieving. But I will say this: that if you want, I will give way.
He said, and I listened very carefully to what he was saying, he does not want to have to adopt rules of origin. So how will we avoid adopting rules of origin unless we are in a customs union relationship with the EU?
I've said on a number of occasions we should leave being in the customs union on the table. I think it is the prospect we've got at the what the government has done is to sweep these options off the table without evidence, without facts, without assessing the risks. I have said, and we have said, that what you do is focus on the outcomes. And one of the best ways to achieve tariff-free access across Europe is to have the customs union on the table, at least as an option to consider. And that brings me, I'm just going to press on, because that brings me, I will give way.
I apologise for interrupting his flow, but his leader of his party said a couple of hours ago in this House, I think he was sitting in the chamber, that he wanted to strike free trade deals around the world. How is that possible when you remain a member of the customs union?
I mean, the Secretary of State knows very well what I said, and I said it carefully. I'm not sure how I respond.
You can say that with a straight face. I really don't know.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, quite sure what all the hilarity is. This is a very serious matter, and I think it should be debated in a serious manner. Sir Keir Starmer. Sorry,
Mr. Speaker, I'm just considering how I respond to a cry of chaos from a government that 2 months ago had a majority, now has a minority, is going to a grubby deal with the DUP. The Secretary of State will have heard exactly how I put it, which is that we focus on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union, the exact same benefit, the phrase he used, the exact same benefits of the customs union. I am answering the question. The Secretary of State said the exact same benefits of the customs union. How is that to be achieved? How you did, you know you did, because we put it to you several times since, you know you did. My answer was not a sort of fixed position that we must have this model when we start negotiations. My answer is focus on the outcomes and leave options on the agreement until we have some assessment of the risk and cost of the different options. And one of the things we don't have from the government is any assessment of the risk and cost. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to press on to Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to press on and deal with transitional agreements. It would be a good start. It would be
order. I'm not quite sure what part of the words I'm going to press on. Honourable and right honourable members don't understand, but the opposition spokesman has made it clear that he intends for the present to to press on. So that should be respected until such time as he changes his mind.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If we are to meet the exact same benefits of the single market and the customs union, it would be a good start if the government would now accept that the negotiations will not be complete by March 2019, that transitional arrangements will be needed if we're to avoid a cliff edge, and that transitional arrangements must safeguard our economy, add jobs and provide certainty for business. It also means that by the time of the final agreement, at the end of transitional arrangements, a model or framework will have to have been agreed that truly does deliver the exact same benefits as the single market and the customs union, along with a recognition, if we're being honest, that in the end, if we're going to have a meaningful and ongoing relationship with the EU, a court-like body will be needed to settle disputes. This is not just state-to-state disputes. We need a court-like body to settle business-to-business disputes and individual-to-individual disputes. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's a further issue on reset. and that's the involvement of Parliament. For the first 6 months after the referendum decision, the government fought in the courts to prevent this House having a say even on the triggering of Article 50. They then called a general election to crush the opposition to their Brexit strategy. That has to change. There needs to be a much stronger role for Parliament. We need to strengthen scrutiny and accountability, not push it away.
Yep.
And can we start in this way? And I hope this will be agreed, and I think it will. This House needs a statement from the Secretary of State after each round of the negotiations, a formal statement, so that we can hear how he reports on progress and ask questions. I would ask the Secretary of State to set that precedent now and agree that he will come to this House and report in a formal statement.
The answer, as the right honourable gentleman knows, is yes. The only reason we didn't do it today is because we had a statement from the Prime Minister on effectively the same subject, and I was hoping a whole day's debate on it now. But the answer is yes.
Well, I'm grateful to the Secretary. I understand the point he makes about today, and we had a discussion about it earlier. I'm grateful that he will set the precedent, as it were, for the future rounds, the dates of which we now know, to come back to this House at the earliest opportunity and make a statement so that we can debate it and question him here. Let me turn, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the repeal bill. We do recognise the need to entrench all EU rights and protections in our law. And I said that when the White Paper was published, and I say it again now. Hence, in our manifesto, we had the EU Rights and Protections Bill designed to that end. How it's done matters. As proposed, the repeal bill would contain sweeping powers for the executive with no enhanced safeguards. The statutory instrument procedure has no enhanced safeguard. That is then far too sweeping to be accepted across this House.
Not again.
There is the potential, I hear what the Secretary of State says, and I take him at his word, of course, when he says there will be no limitation, qualification or sunset clauses. I hope that message is getting through to his backbenchers, because many of them campaign to leave the EU on the very basis that these rights should either not exist or be much reduced or limited. So I look forward to seeing a strong three-line whip through this bill, making sure that there are no limitations, no qualifications and no sunset clauses. The repeal bill doesn't include the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I hear what the Secretary of State says about that, nor does it include any future-proofing to ensure that we do not fall behind our EU partners as standards evolve, particularly, for example, in the workplace. There are then at least 7 other bills, but there's no detail because no agreement can be made about what to put in them. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister called a general election saying it would provide certainty and stability as well as we enter the Brexit negotiations. Nothing could be further from the truth. We need a deal, and we need a deal that works. We've started negotiations in the worst of all circumstances. Britain deserves better than that. Thank you.